London, 1837, was a city draped in fog and gaslight, where the cobblestone streets gleamed faintly beneath a pale, indifferent moon. The air smelled of coal smoke and horsehair, mingling with the distant laughter of carriage drivers and the occasional clatter of a falling sign. Amidst this bustling, cold metropolis, the grandeur of the Hartwell estate glimmered like a gem, its windows glowing with warm candlelight that spilled across the manicured gardens, hinting at the evening's spectacle inside. I never thought betrayal would arrive at my own engagement ball, dressed in silk and smiles. Lady Evelyn Hartwell, the heiress of a venerable family, stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, her gown a cascade of pale ivory silk, sequins catching the light like distant stars. Her auburn hair was pinned with delicate pearls, and her heart, though composed on the outside, quivered beneath the careful poise of a lady bred for society's eyes. Tonight was meant to celebrate her engagement to Duke Nathaniel Ashford, a man whose charm had dazzled London's elite for years. Yet beneath that charm lurked an uncertainty she dared not voice aloud. The grand ballroom stretched below, a riot of color, music, and polite conversation. Chandeliers dripped crystal tears from the high ceilings, reflecting 1,000 tiny lights onto the polished marble floors. Servants moved silently, offering flutes of champagne, delicate hors d'oeuvres, and whispered updates from the gathering nobility. Evelyn descended slowly, each step measured, every eye upon her. She had always known the importance of appearances. In London society, a single misstep could haunt a woman forever. And yet, as she scanned the crowd, a strange unease settled over her chest. There he was, Duke Ashford, the man to whom she had pledged her future, standing near the grand fireplace, speaking softly to Clara, her maid. The young woman's laughter, light, musical, effortless, caught in Evelyn's throat. There was something in the Duke's eyes, a warmth and intensity reserved for Clara alone, that made Evelyn's pulse stutter. Her fingers tightened around the railing. She told herself it was imagination. Surely a duke could be polite to a maid without this. But then she heard it, an intimate murmur that carried over the music, soft enough to be a secret, but sharp enough to cut through her heart. "Clara, you understand me in ways I never thought possible," Duke Ashford whispered, his hand brushing hers in a motion that was too deliberate to be casual. The world seemed to tilt. Evelyn's knees felt weak. She gripped the railing, forcing herself to descend the last few steps, each movement a struggle against the horror clawing at her composure. Around her, guests bowed, curtsied, and murmured pleasantries, oblivious to the private disaster unfolding in their midst. The music swelled, a waltz that should have been celebratory, but for Evelyn, it became a cruel accompaniment to humiliation. She felt the weight of countless eyes, imagined or real, noting her quiet dismay, her pale cheeks, her rigid posture. And then it happened. A whisper from Lady Weatherby, a woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper gossip, floated through the ballroom. "Did you hear, Evelyn? I think Duke Ashford's affections may have wandered elsewhere." Evelyn's hand trembled. She realized that in the world of London's elite, appearances were everything, but truth had a way of clawing through the silken masks. She excused herself, gliding past polite curiosity and murmured condolences, and fled to the relative sanctuary of the terrace outside. The fog pressed in, cold and damp, curling around her like a judgmental hand. She pressed her gloved fingers to her lips, stifling a gasp, a sob, anything that would betray her inner devastation. Across the garden, the lamps of the estate glimmered like distant stars, yet none of them could pierce the darkness she felt inside. Evelyn's mind raced. She had known society could be cruel. She had been prepared for gossip, for whispers, for jealous rivals. But betrayal from one she had trusted, from the very man she had loved, was an agony unlike any she had imagined. The vision of Clara's bright laughter, of Duke Ashford's lingering touch, replayed in her mind relentlessly. And yet, amid the panic and despair, a slow, furious resolve began to form. "I will not be a victim," she vowed silently, the icy fog biting at her cheeks. "I will not crumble before them. I will rise, even if it means walking alone through the ruins of this night." A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping past the terrace, unseen by the ball's revelers. Evelyn turned sharply, heart pounding. but no one was there. Her imagination? Or the first hint of a story she could not yet understand? A shadow of intrigue in the glittering trap of London society. She returned to the ballroom only briefly, enough to gather her belongings, her pride, and her dignity. The music continued. The Duke's laughter floated across the room, and the world moved on as if her heart's fracture were inconsequential. Yet Evelyn knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. The glittering ballroom, the chandeliers, the endless parade of polite smiles, they had all become the setting of her awakening. She had seen the truth behind the masks, the fragility of affection when measured against ambition. Tonight, London witnessed her humiliation. But tomorrow, she would choose her path. And somewhere in the twisting fog of cobblestone streets and gaslight, a stranger's life waited, one she could not yet see, but whose presence would challenge the very notion of love she thought she knew. The days after the engagement ball blurred into a haze of whispered condolences and the polite avoidance of relatives who had once smiled so warmly. London society, ever eager for scandal, had already woven Evelyn's humiliation into the tapestry of gossip. Invitations were scarce, letters more cautious, and every glance from a visitor seemed to carry silent judgment. Evelyn retreated to her family estate in Surrey, a sprawling countryside manor shaded by ancient oaks. The gardens, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth, mirroring her own tangled emotions. Each morning, she wandered along gravel paths, wrapped in a cloak of grief, the dew soaking the hems of her skirts, while the distant hum of the city reminded her of the life she had lost, or rather, the life she had been denied. Her parents, anxious to preserve the family's reputation, convened in the drawing-room one damp morning. Lady Hartwell, elegant and stern, pressed a letter into Evelyn's hands. "It is from Duke Sebastian Montclair," her mother said, voice tight with expectation. "He has expressed interest in making a formal proposal. It is advantageous, discreet, and timely given recent events." Evelyn's fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. It was brief, courteous, and carefully neutral, betraying nothing of the man's personality. "Lady Evelyn Hartwell, I am aware of the difficult circumstances you have endured. If it pleases you, I wish to offer my hand in marriage. I assure you discretion, respect, and comfort in all matters. Duke Sebastian Montclair." Her heart hardened. She had never met this man, yet already she felt the weight of expectation pressing upon her. A stranger, a political match. And yet, the subtle kindness implied in his words was unfamiliar in a world so obsessed with display and status. "Mother, Evelyn's voice faltered. She could not voice her fear without betraying the vulnerability she had worked so hard to conceal. Her mother's eyes softened slightly. "I know you feel betrayed, child. But think, he is a duke, respected, and without scandal. Your choice is between despair and dignity." Despair clung to her like a shadow. The thought of exchanging one cage for another, albeit gilded, was unappealing. And yet, in the quiet despair of her chamber, Evelyn felt a flicker of curiosity. What manner of man would send a letter so considerate, so carefully measured? The first meeting was arranged in the manor's drawing-room, a space she had walked through countless times, but now seemed unfamiliar, charged with expectation. A hush fell over the household as Sebastian Montclair arrived, tall and imposing, yet there was no arrogance in his stance. His dark hair was swept back neatly, and his eyes, sharp yet patient, assessed her with a careful steadiness. "Lady Evelyn," he said, bowing slightly, "it is an honor to meet you under circumstances I wish were less hurried." Evelyn noted the subtle timbre of his voice, warm, even, and without pretense. There was no hint of condescension, no trace of the casual cruelty she had endured with Duke Ashford. "Duke Montclair," she replied, curtly polite, "I appreciate your consideration." Their initial conversation was measured, carefully poised with the etiquette of aristocracy. Yet beneath the formalities, a subtle tension thrummed in the air, like a string pulled tight, ready to snap or to resonate. Evelyn found herself analyzing his every gesture, the deliberate calm of his hands, the absence of unnecessary flourishes, the way he observed her without judgment. She bristled at the thought of acquiescing to a marriage arranged by society rather than affection. Yet paradoxically, she felt a curious comfort in his steadiness, a promise that this union might not be entirely hollow. The days that followed were a delicate dance of observation and politeness. Sebastian Montclair was meticulous, ensuring her comfort in every detail. The temperature of the drawing room, the placement of cushions, the careful selection of books and music for their hours together. He spoke little of himself, but listened attentively, giving weight to even her smallest words. Evelyn's pride resisted, and yet, against her will, the intrigue of a man who seemed entirely unlike Ashford began to stir. There was a subtle power in his restraint, a quiet command that demanded attention without force. She found herself anticipating his presence in the halls, the way his eyes would meet hers briefly over tea or while arranging the daily correspondence. Society murmurs were relentless, however. Friends and relatives asked pointedly after the engagement, their glances probing, seeking signs of hesitation or doubt. Evelyn maintained her composure, but behind closed doors, she questioned herself. Could she marry a man she barely knew? Could dignity outweigh the cold shadow of fear and heartbreak? The final decision loomed during a quiet evening in her private chamber. The moonlight streamed through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the floor. Evelyn stood before her mirror, her reflection pale and thoughtful. A stranger Duke, a measured life. And yet, could I trust the kindness I sense in him? Or am I merely clinging to the hope that one day I might find warmth where I was denied it before? Sebastian's visit that night was brief but poignant. He bowed at the door, eyes steady, lips curved in a faint, polite smile. Lady Evelyn, if you wish, I am prepared to make arrangements at your convenience. There will be no rush, only what you deem necessary. It was a simple offer, yet the weight of it pressed upon her heart. For the first time since Ashford's betrayal, Evelyn felt a glimmer of agency. Here was a man who did not demand her submission, but offered partnership, respect, and discretion, a stark contrast to the fiery manipulation she had endured before. As a candle flickered between them, Evelyn realized that fear and resentment might still color her choices, but curiosity and caution could coexist. Perhaps in the carefully constructed world of alliances and appearances, she might yet discover something deeper, something genuine. By the following week, the marriage was arranged. London society whispered about the speed of the decision, noting the unusual discretion with barely a hint of scandal. Evelyn, cloaked in calm dignity, prepared to enter a new chapter of her life, unsure if it would bring joy, disappointment, or something entirely unexpected. One evening, as she watched the last carriage leave her family estate, she found herself wondering, not with dread, but with tentative hope, what kind of man Sebastian Montclair truly was. The shadow of betrayal still lingered, but a spark of curiosity, fragile and precious, had taken root. And sometimes, Evelyn thought, the most profound discoveries emerge not from the familiar, but from the stranger whose presence shifts the very air around you. The journey from Surrey to Montclair estate was a slow, deliberate passage into a world Evelyn had only glimpsed in gilded halls and whispered gossip. The carriage wound through misty lanes, past fields that rolled like green oceans under the early morning sun, past ancient hedgerows and stone bridges dusted with moss. Evelyn sat upright, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap, yet her heart raced with anticipation, and she admitted a touch of fear. Sebastian Montclair had instructed the carriage to arrive at the estate before dawn, granting them the privacy of first impressions. When the gates finally opened, revealing the sprawling manor framed by towering elms and a river glinting in the distance, Evelyn's breath caught. Montclair was no ordinary home. It was a palace of refined taste, where every detail spoke of lineage, wealth, and the quiet authority of its owner. The grand entrance hall smelled faintly of polished oak and beeswax, the floor gleaming beneath an immense crystal chandelier that cast fractured light across the marble. Servants moved silently, curtsying at Sebastian's commands, while Evelyn followed quietly, acutely aware of every soft echo of her boots. Sebastian himself was patient, guiding her through the estate with understated elegance. He introduced her to each room, each artwork, and each library shelf with a reverence that suggested intimacy, though he spoke little of himself. Evelyn noted it, the balance between formality and personal regard, and felt an unfamiliar curiosity stir within her. "Lady Evelyn," he said one evening, voice low as they toured the estate's library, "these books are chosen carefully. I hoped they might provide solace or inspiration during your stay." Evelyn ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles of poetry, history, and philosophy. It was, she realized, not just a collection, but a reflection of the man himself, disciplined, thoughtful, cultured. And yet there was a quiet mystery, as if Sebastian withheld his heart as carefully as he arranged these shelves. Days merged into a routine of quiet observation. Evelyn learned the rhythms of estate life: morning walks along riverbanks, afternoons in sun-drenched drawing rooms, evenings filled with candlelight and music. She observed Sebastian in all these settings, noting small acts of attentiveness, ensuring her favorite cushions were placed just so, making tea with exact temperature, adjusting the draft in her chamber before she even noticed a chill. Slowly, she began to glimpse his character beyond the reserve, patience, thoughtfulness, and an almost imperceptible warmth. She resented herself for noticing it. How can I be drawn to a man I barely know, when my heart is still bruised from Ashford's betrayal? Yet the estate itself was not without shadows. One morning, she discovered a letter tucked between the pages of a book she had selected from the library. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, and unknown. "Lady Evelyn, beware the smiles of the past. Not all who seem charming are loyal. Your future is yet to be decided. A friend in London." Her pulse quickened. The note was anonymous, but the implication was unmistakable. Intrigue from her old life had followed her to Montclair. Fear mixed with curiosity. Who would send such a message? Duke Ashford? Someone seeking to manipulate her? Or a society eager to embroil her in scandal once more? Evelyn kept the letter secret, pressing it into the folds of her gown. The estate's serenity was now tinged with suspense, a reminder that the world she had sought to escape could intrude at any moment. Social invitations began arriving. Though she had retreated from London, news of her union with Sebastian had traveled swiftly. Gentlemen and ladies of note would arrive for seasonal balls and luncheons, their presence both a reflection of respect and an opportunity for subtle examination. Evelyn faced each event with a blend of apprehension and resolve. The first ball at Montclair was intimate compared to London standards, held in a newly renovated ballroom with gilded moldings and mirrored walls reflecting the warm glow of dozens of candles. Evelyn observed the guests carefully, friends of her husband, curious relatives, and, as fate would decree, some familiar faces from London society. Duke Ashford and Clara were among the attendees, though their presence was understated, as if they too sensed the delicate balance of this new household. Evelyn's chest tightened at the sight, yet she reminded herself of her dignity, the inner strength she had begun cultivating in Surrey. Sebastian noticed her discomfort, subtly stepping closer during introductions, offering his hand in a quiet, reassuring gesture. No words were needed. The firmness of his presence alone communicated protection and support. Throughout the evening, Evelyn observed her own transformation. She moved with poise rather than fear, spoke with wit rather than self-consciousness, and smiled in a measured, composed manner that conveyed confidence, not submission. And yet, amid the formalities, moments of intimacy revealed themselves. A shared glance over a table of delicacies, a whispered comment during the dance, the brush of his fingers on hers as they adjusted a sleeve or gown. Each interaction, no matter how brief, added layers to her understanding of Sebastian. He was not the fiery, unpredictable passion of Ashford, but rather a slow, deliberate current, steadying rather than overwhelming. His affections were earned in quiet moments, in the care of daily life, in attention to the subtle truths often overlooked by society. Evenings often ended in the library or the study, where candlelight softened shadows across the polished oak and leather-bound volumes. Sebastian would read aloud, and Evelyn would listen, letting the cadence of his voice, the careful enunciation, and the occasional humor or literary insight seep into her consciousness. The walls that her heart had erected against men were not yet breached, but cracks had begun to form, almost imperceptibly. Yet the shadow of London remained. Rumors reached the estate, whispers of Clara's ambitions, hints of Ashford's shallow nature, and veiled threats about the fragile security of her position. Evelyn recognized that while Sebastian offered sanctuary, the world of high society could not be entirely escaped. Still, amid these trials, the estate became a theater of discovery. Evelyn learned to navigate its corridors, its customs, its subtle power dynamics. She began to understand Sebastian, not just as a husband in name, but as a man whose quiet authority, kindness, and discretion might offer something her heart had long been denied: trust, respect, and the possibility of love born not of spectacle, but of understanding. And in those quiet, candlelit hours, Evelyn allowed herself a thought she had scarcely dared entertain before. Perhaps happiness, true happiness, could grow here, behind the velvet curtains of Montclair estate, nurtured not by passion alone, but by patience, attentiveness, and the steady hand of a stranger who had proven unexpectedly profound. The Montclair estate buzzed with anticipation. News had spread. Tonight, London's elite would gather for a gala of rare elegance, a display of wealth, lineage, and careful alliances. Candles blazed in crystal chandeliers, casting a golden glow across the polished floors, while the scent of roses and sandalwood mingled in the grand hall. Evelyn moved through her chambers, adjusting the folds of her gown, a soft shade of silver blue that shimmered with every motion. Her reflection showed composure, dignity, and a quiet confidence that had been forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by days of observation and patience. Yet beneath the surface, her heart quivered. Tonight would test her resolve, not just as a duchess, but as a woman who had endured humiliation and emerged determined to reclaim her life. Sebastian appeared at the doorway, tall and composed, dressed in deep navy and gold accents that mirrored the understated elegance of the Montclair crest. His eyes found hers with a steady warmth that drew a fragile smile to her lips. "Shall we?" he asked, offering his hand. Together, they descended into the grand hall, greeted by the low murmur of conversation and the soft strains of a string quartet. Gentlemen bowed, ladies curtsied, and whispers floated through the air like delicate feathers. Yet amidst the elegance, Evelyn's gaze caught the figures she had once dreaded: Duke Ashford and Clara, seated near the far end of the ballroom, their expressions carefully neutral, yet revealing the slightest unease. The sight made Evelyn's chest tighten. She had imagined this confrontation in every possible scenario, rehearsing words, gestures, and composure. Now, standing beside Sebastian, she realized she needed none of it. His presence was enough, a shield, a quiet assertion that the past held no dominion here. The evening unfolded with a series of formalities, toasts, dances, and polite conversation. Evelyn moved with grace, answering questions, offering smiles, and subtly asserting her presence. Guests remarked on the contrast between her poise and her previous vulnerability. Whispers suggested admiration rather than pity. It was during the second waltz that the moment arrived. Ashford, overconfident, approached with a polite bow and a practiced charm. "Lady Evelyn," he said, voice smooth, "it seems fortune has favored your union with Duke Montclair." "How surprising." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching, her chin lifted. "Surprising, perhaps, but not unwelcome," she replied, her tone calm, almost indifferent. Sebastian, standing just behind her, placed a subtle hand at the small of her back, a gesture of support without dominance. Evelyn felt a warmth rise, an unspoken acknowledgement of partnership, protection, and trust. Ashford's composure faltered, just slightly, a flicker of frustration, or perhaps realization that the woman he had underestimated was no longer vulnerable. Clara's eyes shifted nervously, the carefully constructed charm failing to mask the insecurity beneath. Whispers among the guests hinted at truths long hidden. Ashford's shallow pursuits and Clara's ambition became clear not through confrontation, but through subtle observation. Misaligned glances, interrupted conversations, and the faint tremor in their confidence. The social web they had spun to manipulate and deceive had unraveled in the quiet strength of Montclair's household. Evelyn's heart, once heavy with fear and resentment, felt a strange lightness. She realized that dignity, patience, and the quiet accumulation of trust were more powerful than the flamboyant passion of Ashford's deceit. Later, in a private corner of the estate's expansive gardens, Sebastian found her. The night was still, the moon casting silver ribbons across the dew-laden grass. The distant hum of the gala became a soft backdrop to the intimacy of the moment. "You handled yourself beautifully," Sebastian said, his voice low and intimate, free of formality. "Not just tonight, but these past weeks. You've shown courage where many would falter." Evelyn turned to him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had to. I could not let the past dictate my future." He reached for her hand, fingers intertwining with hers, a gesture both simple and profound. "And now, you may choose your own path, not out of fear, not out of expectation, but because it is yours." In that moment, the barriers Evelyn had erected against love and vulnerability began to crumble. She saw, clearly and unmistakably, the difference between desire built on control and affection founded on respect. Sebastian's strength was quiet, unwavering, and entirely without the manipulation she had endured before. Their first kiss was not dramatic, nor was it whispered in the frenzy of stolen passion. It was deliberate, tender, and filled with the weight of understanding, trust, and the promise of shared life. The moon bore witness as their lives intertwined, not out of obligation, but out of the careful cultivation of affection and respect. The next morning, London's elite continued to murmur about the Montclair union. Some expressed admiration, others curiosity. But Evelyn cared little for the gossip now. Her heart, once bruised and weary, had found an unexpected sanctuary in the form of a man she had known only briefly, yet whose presence had taught her that love could grow slowly, deliberately, and beautifully. Weeks later, as she walked through the gardens, the scent of roses heavy in the morning air, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Betrayal had carved its mark, yet it had also guided her to a choice she might never have seen without the pain of deception. She had married a stranger, yes, but one whose kindness, patience, and unwavering respect had turned unfamiliarity into home, hesitation into trust, and sorrow into love. And somewhere deep within, she knew that in the quiet strength of Sebastian Montclair's gaze, she had found what she had never dared hope for, a love unshakable, earned in the delicate interplay of patience, courage, and mutual understanding. In the world of ballrooms, titles, and whispered ambitions, I discovered the truth. Love is not claimed by grandeur or manipulated by ambition, but nurtured quietly, with attention, respect, and unwavering presence. The Montclair estate, once a house of solemnity and restraint, had become a haven, a place where secrets were safe, hearts were healed, and the slow bloom of love was cherished above all else. Evelyn finally understood. Life's greatest treasures were found not in the glitter of society, but in the unexpected grace of a man who chose to stand beside her, not above her, through every shadow and every candlelit corridor of their shared world.